Have you ever stopped to think how exhausting it must be to live your whole life trying to be understood, or worse? Have you ever wondered if you do that without even realizing it? Maybe you know someone like that. That person who explains everything. Every sentence, every gesture, every emotion. They can't just say what they feel. They have to justify why they feel it. And the more they try to be understood, the less anyone seems to understand them. Living with someone like that is tiring. But being that person is even harder, because behind every explanation, there's fear. Fear of being misunderstood, of seeming cold, of losing affection. It's like living in a constant courtroom, always having to defend yourself from accusations no one ever made. And the saddest part, most people don't even notice they're doing it. But there comes a moment, and everyone reaches it, when the exhaustion speaks louder. You realize you've explained yourself so much, translated yourself so many times, that you've forgotten what it feels like to speak lightly, without fear of judgment. That's when silence arrives. Not as emptiness, but as relief. And strangely enough, that's when peace appears. Not when the world finally understands you, but when you stop trying to explain yourself. There's a kind of tiredness medicine can't diagnose. It doesn't show up in blood tests, has no medical term, no prescription. It lives somewhere deeper. Not in the muscles, not in the bones, but in that vague space between who you are and who you think you need to be. It's the exhaustion of having to explain yourself, of translating your existence into something acceptable, as if you were a foreign language that always needs subtitles. And the strange thing is, we don't even notice when it starts. There's no marked day, no specific scene. It happens slowly, in the little everyday conversations. Sorry, I'm a bit quiet today. I didn't mean it that way. I think I said it wrong. Small phrases, almost polite, but hiding a silent negotiation. Is it okay for me to be like this? Will you still accept me? And that negotiation, it never ends. Life starts to feel like a constant act of diplomacy, as if every emotion needed context, as if feeling itself required an explanation. Think about it. How many times have you apologized just for being tired? As if tiredness were a crime. As if feeling the weight of the world needed a justification. Sorry for being like this. But like what? Human. Vulnerable. Real. We keep apologizing for existing outside the manual of how to be an easy, light, uncomplicated person, and deep down, we're not really asking for forgiveness. We're asking for permission. Permission to feel without being judged, to exist without subtitles. There's a phrase that sums it all up. Peace isn't lost in great wars, but in small daily justifications. It slips away through the words we didn't need to say. In that sorry to bother you before making a perfectly valid request. In the long text explaining why you can't go to an event when a simple I can't would have been enough. Peace doesn't leave all at once. It evaporates, drop by drop, until one day you realize you've dried up inside. But where does all this come from? Why did we learn that existing requires justification? The answer is way back there. Before adulthood, before the fear of seeming weak, it starts in childhood. In that time when feeling was simple and natural, and it was right there that something began to break. Picture a child crying. They don't know what too much means. They don't know what being dramatic is. They just feel. But then someone, with the best of intentions, says, "Stop it. It's not that bad." Or, "Come on, stop crying." Those phrases sound harmless, but they plant a dangerous idea. My feelings are a problem. And that's how, almost without realizing it, the fear of being too much begins. From that moment on, the world starts teaching a new language, the language of emotional control. The child notices that affection comes when they behave, that love appears when they smile, that praise arrives when they're easy to handle, and they learn. They learn fast. They learn that to be loved, they have to make sense. The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott called this the false self. The mask we create to survive in an environment that doesn't welcome our true self. That adapted self is polite, coherent, functional, but it's also tired because the price of being accepted is high. It's the growing distance between who we show and who we really are. And that distance eventually turns into pain, not the kind that screams, but the kind that weighs. That's why, in adulthood, we find ourselves explaining the obvious. I just wanted to help. It's nothing personal. I swear I'm not mad. The child inside is still trying to prove they're not a problem, that they're easy to love, that they won't be rejected as long as they're understandable enough. But there comes a moment when the body starts to expose the lie. The mind gets tired of rehearsing safe reactions. The heart gets sick of asking for permission to feel, and that's when the crises we call anxiety, emptiness, insomnia appear, but their real name is chronic self-denial. It's the soul saying, I'm here. Listen to me. There's a concept in Jungian psychology that explains much of this. The ego is not you. It's just a part of you. The conscious part. The one that makes decisions and interacts with the world. But there's something deeper, something greater, that Jung called the self, the true center of the psyche, where your entire essence lives, with all your contradictions, shadows, and light. The problem begins when the ego disconnects from the self, when it stops serving the wholeness of who you are and starts serving only the need to be accepted. That's when the ego stops being a healthy bridge between you and the world, and becomes a lawyer for your fear, an overworked lawyer, constantly building defenses, preparing arguments, rehearsing explanations, all to make sure you're never rejected. Think about that moment when you send a message, and seconds later, you send another one to explain the first. Or when you say something in a conversation and immediately add, wait, no, that's not what I meant. What's happening there isn't communication. It's defense. It's your ego trying to shield you from the possibility of rejection. But here's the thing. Justifying yourself isn't honesty. It looks like it is, right? It seems like you're being transparent, open, vulnerable. But it's not that. Justifying is self-protection in disguise. It's trying to control the story people tell about you. It's a subtle form of manipulating how you'll be perceived. And the more you do it, the further you drift from your truth, because you've stopped expressing yourself and started defending yourself. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, necessarily involves freeing the ego from its dependence on other people's approval, because as long as you keep validating yourself through other people's eyes, you'll never really know who you are. You'll only know the version of yourself that others approve of, and that version might be functional, it might even be successful, but it will never bring you peace. Every justification you give is an attempt to protect yourself from rejection, not to communicate truth. When you communicate, you simply put your truth out into the world and let it be what it is. When you justify, you're trying to control how that truth will be received, and that, at its core, is fear. But think about it. What kind of connection do you actually want? One where people accept you because you managed to convince them that you're acceptable, or one where people see you, with all your edges, contradictions, and complexities, and choose to stay anyway. The first is the ego's victory. The second is freedom. Society has a beautiful word for people who are easy to deal with: polite, understanding, mature. We grow up hearing that these are the marks of someone evolved, someone who knows how to live among others. And there's nothing wrong with kindness or maturity. The problem begins when those words become a mask for something else. Self-erasure. Because deep down, what our culture values isn't authenticity. It's predictability. People want to know you won't create discomfort, won't question, won't demand too much. They want you to fit. And to fit, you learn to mold yourself. You learn to say, it's fine when it's not. You learn to smile when you'd rather stay quiet, and they call that harmony. But what kind of harmony requires you to betray yourself to keep it? That's not peace. That's suppression. True peace is when you can be fully yourself and still belong. What we usually call harmony is just an unspoken agreement. I'll pretend everything's fine. You'll pretend to believe it. And neither of us has to face what's real. Think of that family dinner where everyone smiles, but no one talks about what actually matters. Or that friendship where you always agree, always support, always show up, but never get to express your own needs without being called selfish. That's not healthy connection. That's performance. Nietzsche once said, "The price of harmony is often a lie." And that's exactly it. Every time you say, "It's fine," when it's not, you lie. Every time you swallow your hurt to keep the peace, you lie. Every time you overexplain, oversoften, twist yourself not to upset anyone, you're lying, not to others, to yourself. And that lie starts to pile up, layer upon layer, until one day you don't recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. The saddest part is that we do it thinking we're being noble. We think we're being the bigger person, the one who chooses peace. But there's a huge difference between choosing your battles and living in constant surrender. And the worst part, people around you get used to that edited version of you. They start to expect you to always be understanding, flexible, available. And when you finally try to set a boundary, when you try to speak the truth without filters, they get confused. You've changed. What happened to that easygoing person you used to be? But you haven't changed. You just stopped pretending. And what they miss isn't you. It's the comfort you used to provide. So maybe the real question isn't, how do I get people to understand me? Maybe it's, why do I need so badly to be understood? And the answer always leads back to the same place. Because you still believe love is something you earn through good behavior. But the truth is, harmony built on self-denial isn't harmony. It's a ticking time bomb. And eventually it goes off. There comes a moment when the body simply can't hold the act anymore. You can't predict when it'll happen. There's no date, no warning, but you feel it. It's like an old rope, strained for years under the weight of all your explanations, finally starting to fray, until suddenly, snap, something inside you breaks. And it's not an explosive break. It's not a scream, a fight, or a scene. It's silence. A silence so heavy it almost makes a sound. The kind that comes after deep exhaustion. The moment when you simply don't have the energy to keep defending yourself anymore. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally become lucid. You look at everything you've been holding up. The speeches, the fears, the versions of yourself you built to be accepted, and realize, I don't want this anymore. It's strange, because the world around you stays the same. People still expect the same answers, the same smiles, the same predictable behavior, but something inside you changes frequency. You start replying more slowly. You pause before explaining. You feel the impulse to justify. And for the first time, you stop yourself. And in that small space between impulse and response, something new is born. Awareness, Viktor Frankl once said. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power to choose. That's exactly where the breaking point happens. When the old reflex, to explain, to adapt, to protect, tries to resurface, but you choose the opposite. You choose silence. You choose not to convince. You choose not to fit. And that small act, so subtle on the outside, is revolutionary, because that's the moment the script begins to tear. And when the script tears, the character you built to survive starts to fade. In their place, an emptiness appears, frightening, but also freeing. The breaking point is a birth, and birth hurts, but it's the pain of becoming, not the pain of ending. It's the body saying, enough. Enough holding back. Enough pleasing. Enough translating yourself just to be understood. And when you allow that rupture to happen, something quietly sacred begins. When the rope finally snaps, the first sound that follows isn't a scream. It's silence. A silence that startles you at first, because someone who spent a lifetime explaining themselves doesn't know what to do with the quiet that's left when the words stop. But this silence isn't absence. It's space. And space is where healing begins. For the first time, you're not trying to adjust the world around you. You're listening to what comes from within, without rush, without filters, without the urge to make sense of it. At first, you'll want to break that silence. You'll want to explain yourself again, just a little. You'll hear the old voice whispering, people will misunderstand you. And that's where the real test lies, because silence is an act of faith. It's trusting that you don't need to defend yourself to keep existing. It's believing that the truth doesn't need to be explained to remain true. Think of a lake. When its surface is disturbed, it reflects nothing, only distortions. But when the wind stops, when movement ceases, the reflection becomes clear again. That's what silence does to the soul. It clears the noise. It lets you see yourself again, without the distortion of fear or the need for approval. Many people mistake this moment for isolation. They think silence means distance, when in fact it means reconnection. Because when you stop speaking outward, you finally begin to listen inward. And it's in that inner dialogue that real healing happens. The curious thing is, the longer you hold that silence, the stronger you become inside, not because you've found new answers, but because you've learned not to need them all the time. You start to understand that there's a kind of peace that doesn't depend on being understood, only on being present with yourself. And for the first time, you realize you're not hiding. You're finally inhabiting yourself. When you begin to go quiet, the world notices. Not because you've suddenly changed, but because your silence disrupts the rhythm of relationships. After all, most of our bonds are built on predictable exchanges. You explain, they approve, you give in, they stay comfortable. It's an old game. And when one player stops playing, the entire board falls apart. In the beginning, people don't understand. They ask if you're angry, distant, cold. You've changed. But it's not that you've changed. It's that, for the first time, you stop performing, and that scares them. Because without your constant explanations, others are forced to face their own discomfort. Some will try to pull you back into your old role. You used to be more understanding. Why are you so cold lately? Those comments aren't really about you. They're about their loss of control. It's natural that this creates resistance. Not everyone will applaud your silence. Some will drift away. Others will try to provoke you. But little by little you realize, silence also filters. It's a kind of truth detector. It shows who was beside you out of genuine connection, and who was there because it was convenient. Carl Jung once said that the process of individuation separates. But in order to unite at a higher level, that's exactly what happens here. You start losing connections based on emotional dependency and make room for relationships that are truer, more mature, more free. The ones who stay are those who don't need to understand you all the time to respect you. They don't demand translation. Only presence, of course. It hurts to get to that point. It hurts to see people walk away. It hurts to realize that the harmony you once defended was built on your submission. But it's a clean kind of pain. The pain of clearing the debris after a collapse. And when the dust settles, what remains is lightness. And that's what silence really does. It reorganizes the world around you, not by force, but through the simple absence of noise. It disables power games, dismantles subtle manipulation, and gives you back something no one else could: your inner authority, at some point along the way. After the external noise fades, you start to hear a voice that doesn't come from outside. It comes from within, not the anxious voice that narrates what you should have said, done, or explained, but an older voice, calmer, steadier. It doesn't shout, it simply knows. That's your inner authority awakening, what Jung called the self, the true center of the psyche, where everything you are comes together: fear and courage, doubt and clarity, shadow and light. This is the point where you stop chasing validation and start seeking alignment. Inner authority doesn't impose, explain, or ask for permission. It simply guides. And the curious thing is, when you begin living guided by it, decisions become quieter. You don't need endless internal meetings for every choice. You just feel when something is true. And that's enough. It's as if, after years of chasing external compasses, you finally realize the north was always inside you, and that north doesn't shift with the winds of other people's opinions. But to hear that voice, you have to learn to tell it apart from the others. The voice of fear is fast, urgent, overly logical. The voice of the ego is defensive, always worried about image and control. The voice of inner authority is different. It doesn't try to persuade. It affirms. And when you hear it, you feel a kind of peace that doesn't need to be explained. This is the moment when your entire axis shifts. Before, the world was the center, and you revolved around it, trying to keep everything balanced. Now, you are the center, and the world moves around you, not out of arrogance but maturity, but because you finally understand that you can't control how you're perceived, but you have full control over how you show up. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why can bear almost any how." Your inner authority is that why. When it awakens, you no longer need applause or permission. You just need coherence. And coherence is the name the soul gives to peace. From here, everything begins to change. Your relationships, your work, your very way of being. Because anything born from your truth grows with strong roots, and anything that isn't begins to fall away on its own. No effort, no drama, simply because it no longer makes sense. And that's when you finally understand that all your justifications were never really about helping others understand you. They were about you not trusting your own voice. But now that voice is back, and it doesn't want to convince anyone. It just wants to exist. Something curious happens when you stop justifying yourself. The world changes. Or at least it seems to. People start reacting differently. Relationships reorganize, and even the air around you feels cleaner. But what really changed wasn't the world. It was your presence. You stopped vibrating at the frequency of need and started vibrating at the frequency of certainty. And certainty doesn't make noise. Before, every gesture came with a footnote. Now, the gesture alone is enough. Before, you'd say, "I can't," and rush to explain 20 reasons so no one would feel offended. Now, you just say, "I can't." And the silence that follows is what holds your peace together. It's a calm that feels strange at first, but soon becomes addictive. Because being misunderstood stops being a problem. It becomes just a detail. The people who once fed off your fear of displeasing start to drift away. Not out of resentment, but because there's nothing left to take from someone who no longer explains themselves. And the ones who stay look at you with a different kind of respect. Not fear, not blind admiration, but recognition. They sense they're standing in front of someone whole, someone who doesn't need to be understood to be genuine. Lao Tzu once said, "He who knows himself is enlightened. He who masters himself is powerful." And that's exactly it. You don't control the world or how others perceive you. You master your own center. You learn that peace doesn't come when everyone agrees, but when you no longer need them to. And at that point, something magical happens. People actually start to listen. It's paradoxical but true. The less you try to be understood, the more people understand you, because your energy shifts. You no longer speak to convince. You speak to share. You no longer speak to be accepted. You speak to express. And people can feel the difference, even if they can't explain why. Your tone changes. Your eyes change. Even the rhythm of your words changes. You're no longer trying to take up space. You are the space. This new kind of presence is what some would call calm magnetism. It's not charisma. It's not performance. It's authenticity in its purest form. The power of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. And the world respects that instinctively. Because truth has its own frequency. It doesn't shout. It resonates. It doesn't demand. It endures. And suddenly, you realize something simple yet immense. Life feels lighter. Not because other people changed, but because you stopped carrying the weight of explanation. You no longer need to be the translator of your own soul. Now, you just live. And let everyone understand you in whatever language they can. That's real freedom. Being misunderstood and staying whole anyway. Because truth doesn't need to be understood. It only needs to be held. In the end, peace was never where you were looking. It wasn't in the perfect explanation, the resolved conversation, or anyone's understanding. Peace was always still, quiet, patient, waiting for you to stop chasing it, because peace doesn't come when the world understands who you are. It comes when you realize you no longer need to defend it. It's strange how everything changes when you stop justifying yourself. The body relaxes. The mind slows down. Words lose the weight of need. And silence, that silence that once felt empty, starts to sound like music. It's as if something inside you finally exhales and whispers, "Now, this is it." You begin to see that you no longer need to be right, nor understood, because truth doesn't need an audience, only coherence. And coherence is simple. Feel what you feel, say what's yours to say, and stay quiet when silence says enough. No defenses, no fear, no performance. The peace that finds you isn't loud or grand. It arrives softly in an ordinary afternoon, when you catch yourself taking a deep breath and thinking, "It's okay." It appears when you stop forcing things, when you accept that some people will misread you, and that's fine. When you understand that not every silence needs to be filled, and not every absence needs to be explained, that's when the weight dissolves. You look back and realize that your justifications were never bridges. They were chains, and that the freedom you'd been chasing wasn't about having the right to say everything, but the courage to not need to say anything. It's a kind of lightness that doesn't depend on your surroundings, because it lives inside you. And once it arrives, it never leaves, because the peace that finds you isn't a visitor. It's a homecoming. In the end, it all comes down to this. You don't find peace by explaining who you are. You find it the moment you stop defending your truth and let peace find you.